Good morning. Welcome to BlackUSA.News. My name's Johnny Glover, and we're here with special co-host, senior journalist in town, Charles Robinson. Good morning, Mr. Robinson.
Morning, Donnie. Great to see you.
We're going to turn the show over to you, sir.
So first and foremost, let me begin with, it's always a pleasure to be with Donnie Glover, and our guest today is none other than the president of the Baltimore City Council, President Nick Mosby. And our guest journalist is Darius G. And Darius, we'll let you chime in a little bit too on this. So let's begin with this, President Mosby. You're part of a new leadership team that's in Baltimore City Hall. Talk a little bit about how your sensibilities and those of the mayor, as well as Bill Henry, have changed, if you will, from past administrations.
Well, the mayor, as well as comptroller and myself, we served on the Baltimore City Council together. I think there's a very unique opportunity in the city's history, having three African-American males from the city of Baltimore serve at those three citywide positions. And I think right now, more than ever, it's critical that we see the collaboration and what I call partners in progress between our offices. Now, coming in this role as city council president, the city council in the past has been a body that's been there to kind of only handle constituent services. So filling potholes, boarding up buildings, support with public safety, kind of being that conduit or liaison between the citizens' needs and city services. But the charter has for the city council to be much more than that, and that's a true legislative body. I believe it's our job, our role, our responsibility of developing, proposing, and passing legislation to go after, some of those systemic issues that have plagued our communities for far too long. So taking a more proactive approach as opposed to a reactive approach. And in the first 90 some days of the administration, we've already been able to put out legislation around housing insecurity, legislation around putting more resources into our school system to provide vocational training and job training and placement for our young folks, as well as relief to restaurants and small business owners. So that's just like three quick examples. What I've also done is taken my experience, Charles, from Annapolis and brought it to City Hall, where we've basically restructured the council from 13 committees down to 6 committees. We've increased the size of the committees. Prior to taking over, some of the committees were only 3 members, meaning you only needed 2 members of the city council to move a piece of legislation onto the floor for second reader. So we have larger committees now that have a strong amount of discourse and debate amongst them. We've eliminated the single issue committees, particularly a committee like education, where education policy is done in Annapolis, not in City Hall. But we've combined it with things like education, workforce, and youth development. We've done the same thing with transportation. Transportation goes hand in hand with development. So now that's in the Economic Community Development Committee. So those are the types of things that we've done on the council to kind of restructure. The last point I'll say about the relationship between the three of us is no more do you get 5-minute Board of Estimates meetings. Like, we're really getting into the nitty-gritty of how these contracts are taking place. And what's really important to me is that minority businesses, as well as folks who are employed by these businesses living in the city, are of the utmost importance as it relates to the way that we are looking at these contracts and ensuring that we are providing Baltimore with the best, like particularly when we're talking about in the midst of COVID and the economic downturn and the residual effects it's going to have on our communities. That's really, really important. So, with those bucket of items, I think that you see a drastic change from what we saw in the past. And I think that right now, at this very moment, again, with 3 young African-American men at the helm of these positions, I think it's so critical as it relates to us, our inner workings, but also as it relates to the hope that we can provide to the citizens of Baltimore moving the city forward.
Thank you, President Mosby. I want to get to the black business thing, but there's something that happened last night, and I know you were kind of probably monitoring it, and that was the police officers' Bill of Rights that went through the House, a body that you were a member of. And last night, it got the green light. It looks like it's going to go through on third reader. Public safety has always been a big issue within Baltimore. I know you know this. You're not immune from it. Give me your sense, if you will, because there have been a lot of young people who unfortunately have died in this process. Give me your sense. Is this an accountability issue, or is it a systemic change that you see coming?
I don't think that there's a silver bullet as it relates to the crime that we see playing out on our streets. Crime has always been a problem in the city of Baltimore since I've been alive. I don't look a difference between 350 murders is bad and 250 murders is good. I think, any amount of murders is a problem. Any amount of violence is a problem. I think that the job and the role of city council is not, again, not the reactive job, not the job that is there to develop a crime fighting solution. I believe that's the job of the mayor in conjunction with the police commissioner. I think our job is, how do we go after the roots of why crime takes place? How do we develop policies to provide more opportunities to our young folks so we can get to them before they get to the criminal system or before they get to a circumstance that involves crime? I think that is the role of the city council. And I think that when we talk about the local jobs hiring program and naming this new fund after Dante Barksdale to put money into, our school vocational training and job training and access opportunities, I think it's those type of things that will really go after the core of why crime takes place. The last thing I'll say about that is, when you look at the city's priorities, right? And I say it priorities because your budget is your priorities. Over the past 40 years, public safety money has increased when compared to inflation. But all the money that we put into our young folks, recs and parks, education has decreased when you compare the two. So that means we're spending less on a kid today than we were 30 and 40 years ago. And when you paint the systemic issues of the increased racial wealth gap, when you paint the issues around what the drug epidemic through the 80s and 90s have done to our communities, when you paint homelessness, just despair, all of the different things that we can kind of talk about, the byproduct is crime. So the only way to truly battle back is be a prescription to those ills, to change some of the courses of bad policy from the past and develop better policy to provide more opportunities. I think as a council, that is our job. I think we're there again to support the mayor, support the police commissioner on the crime plan. The last thing I'll say to wrap it up, I constantly get questions like, well, what is the council's crime fighting plan? The council doesn't have a crime fighting plan. The police department and the mayor have a crime fighting plan. The council is there to legislate and ensure that, again, proactively, we're developing legislation to meet the needs of our citizens to, again, try to get to the root of why crimes are taking place.
Appreciate that, President Mosby. Let me turn to my guests who are also on the line here and give them an opportunity to throw some questions away. Let's begin with Donnie Glover. Donnie, you have the floor, and go ahead with your question.
Mr. President, Black business, we have Attorney Dashiell with us. As you know, is very important to us as we've been pushing the Black Wall Street movement going on 10 years now. It is imperative that as we grow our Black businesses, we need the support of the city of Baltimore. So we see a lot of non-Black businesses get love. We see Port Covington evolve. But when you look at inside the community, a lot of our businesses fail to get access to contracts. So there was an $11 million contract that went through. I think the first thing the Board of Estimates voted on. And my concern was the level of MBE participation in that the very first contract the Board of Estimates voted on. How do we increase MBE participation?
So, I mean, Don, if you've been tuning into the Board of Estimates meetings, they've definitely significantly increased. There's been a tremendous amount of scrutiny on those contracts as it relates to minority participation. I know of 3 offhand that have been pulled off of the Board of Estimates and sent back to the agency at hand. The concern that I've seen thus far is, there's one thing to talk about like sole source or, this specific hydraulic pump for DPW that only this vendor that can kind of work on because it's been in existence for 100 years and they are kind of like special matter experts for that. We can kind of understand and move on. The real concern that I'm seeing out of some of these contracts is when we're talking about procurement of salt, or we're talking about security, or we're talking about roofs, or we're talking about laying carpet. These are types of businesses that small businesses, local businesses, Black-owned businesses that should be at the table and participate in it. It's a problem to me to see when those types of contracts have waivers set in them. And those are the things that we've been flagging and that we'll continue to flag and been pushing back. I think that the entire agenda needs to be restructured in a way that's more transparent to the naked eye, folks that can just come on and read and kind of understand and know the business of the Board of Estimates. I think because of so much of the pushback that we've seen, I know the administration has decided to do a complete evaluation overhaul of the procurement process. We've been working directly with the MWBOO office on some of these things. And I think as a result, you will see significant changes to provide and increase the participation on these contracts coming through the city of Baltimore.
Okay. Attorney Dashiell?
Yes, sir. Hi, Nick. How you doing?
How you doing, Bob?
How are you? What's your question, Donnie?
Did you have a question?
No, if you want me to comment upon what the president just said, let me just say generally, I congratulated Nick yesterday, and I'll do it again today because I think that his bill to require government contractors to contribute to a fund that's going to help provide training for our kids is an excellent thing to do. It's a great idea. I'm surprised that we hadn't done it before, but it's good to do it now. The problem, first of all, the procurement system as such in Baltimore has one glaring problem, and that is there is no opportunity for due process or real review of what's being presented to the board for consideration. As it stands now, you can submit a protest. And procurement is all about procedure. That's all it is. It's all about procedure and maintaining and creating a level playing field for everybody who wants to do business. So right now, you can submit a protest at 12 o'clock on Tuesday, and for a matter that's on the board's agenda 9 o'clock the next morning. Now, is there any opportunity between 12 o'clock Tuesday and 9 o'clock Wednesday morning to do any real investigation of the protest? Is there any opportunity for the interested parties to really know what's going on and have input into that process? The answer is no. So all that happens between the time of the protest and the board is the staff that for whatever reason has already decided this is going to be the recommendation to further try to support the recommendation with the members of the board who have had no opportunity independently to conduct an investigation of anything. That has been a fundamental problem in the city's procurement system for ages. And quite frankly, it could have been, it didn't have to be, it doesn't require an RFP or a consultant to come in and tell that in the file somewhere in the archives of City Hall, there are at least 2 reports from task force that have been appointed over the years to address that very issue. How do I know? Because I was chairman of one of them. Now, so that's and the process is easy. Just adopt what the state does and almost every other jurisdiction does that has a bid protest process. You submit the protest, you have an opportunity for a response, you have a hearing, and you have people sworn to tell the truth, which doesn't happen now. Right now, you come before the Board of Estimates, anybody says whatever they want. Nobody's under oath. Not even you go to a zoning meeting, you got to put your hand up and say, I swear to tell the truth. You don't have to do that in front of the Board of Estimates. These are obvious problems that can be fixed right now by anybody who wants to fix them. And the only person authorized to do that is the mayor of Baltimore. That's by charter.
Mr. Mosby, Mr. President, what will be your legacy?
My legacy, I would say two things. That's ensuring that we pour all that we can into young folks to create real opportunities for our young folks. Again, when we talk about the curve of inflation and what we're spending on young folks today versus 30 and 40 years ago, it's troubling. And then the second part is that growing local small Black businesses in our city. I think 30 years ago, Baltimore was home to about 13, 14 of the top 100 Black businesses in the country. When we look at our city today, you have between Bith Energy and Mr. Eddie Brown, which is not on the services type. So it's really just Bith Energy. That is concerning in itself, particularly of a city of our characteristics, with elected officials of our characteristics, and with communities that literally have held this city up for far too long. And that's why, I do, and I'm attempting to continue to build on really scrutinizing what we're approving on the Board of Estimates. I had the ability of speaking with Mr. Dashiell regarding the process of procurement. We already have bills in around procurement based off of some of those things. So we are not waiting on this announcement from the administration last week about setting up a new task force. There's already things, to Mr. Dashiell's point, that can be done immediately. But yes, if I could pick two things for my legacy, it would be those two things.
Darius, do you have a question for the president before we go back to Charles?
Yes, sir. Good morning, Nick.
Good morning, Darius.
Mr.
Looking
President.
back, you went through a lot of legislation throughout your career. Looking back at it, what would you say your greatest achievement was politically?
That would be hard. So I'm gonna say a couple. I'm gonna say the first was ban the box here in the city of Baltimore. It's the most progressive form of ban the box to provide formerly incarcerated citizens the fair playing field and access to jobs. Implementation is still somewhat of an issue as it relates to going after bad actors, but the legislation is there. I was able to take that legislation that was really hotly contested and pushed back and opposed on the city level by the business community. I was able to take that legislation to me in Annapolis and pass that statewide. I would say development of a $1 million endowment fund for HBCUs is the first of its kind in the state of Maryland. I'm not sure in the rest of the country, but I took an innovative way of ensuring that at least we had a perpetual endowment for the 4 HBCUs. I would say saving the Preakness. It came over from the Senate. I was out in front of ensuring that the Preakness did not leave Baltimore. If you talk to members of Prince George's County, Anne Arundel County, Montgomery County during that session, if it was leaving Baltimore, everyone knew that it was leaving Baltimore. Now, back to Donnie's point and what we've been talking about, the community has not necessarily benefited from the Preakness. And I understood that, but I didn't want to throw the baby out with the bathwater. That doesn't mean that the past has to be the present or the future. I think that it's incumbent of us to ensure that the community and African-American small businesses in the city are benefiting and are at the table as it relates to such a $30 million economic engine to our city every single year. And then lastly, I would say a bill that came over from the Senate last year, 47-0, and Charles was there that witnessed this, was a bill around sports betting. And in that sports betting bill, it was basically constructed to, if you were the owner of a professional stadium, a casino, or horse track racing facility, you would automatically get access to a sports betting license, this new multi-million-dollar license. In 2020, without any competition and with a complete exclusion of minority participation. Again, that bill came over from the Senate, 47-0. I was able to kill that bill last year It was one of my biggest victories last session. This session, they've come back with another bill. Obviously, I'm not there. It's not in the posture in which I constructed what I wanted to be for it last year. But at least there will be some minority participation. I can't say that I'm completely happy or satisfied with what they've come up with, but I definitely respect the work that has been performed down in Annapolis on that particular bill. But that's a bill that would have created a brand new industry, excluding anybody that looks like on this panel out, and including folks that were already around a table that was built on structural racism. And I was glad to stop that and bring it back this year.
Appreciate that. I want to call you delegate, but I know it's President Mosby.
It's all good. Just call me Nick.
Okay. I want to ask a little bit about Baltimore City Public Schools. I think a lot of people get confused that you're part of a triad, if you will. There's the state, there's the city, and you get to pick who the president of the school board is. And in lieu of, if you will, several disturbing trends, and I'll call them trends, because I think a lot of people want to know, why aren't our young people learning, and what can you do beyond the triad, if you will, of making sure the young people in the city get a solid foundation?
No, I mean, we understand and know that education is the core of everything. And it's been, through our 400 years of history, really been the tool that has always been there to oppress. And we still see it today. When we look at Baltimore City Public Schools, there's no secret that historically it's been underfunded by the state, right? You look at the different commissions and rulings on the federal side, even up until now from a Kerwin perspective. I think that what I will say is this. It's a tremendous problem, but the city must do more. It's one of those things like you can continue to blame folks for your issues, but your stuff is not necessarily perfect in your own house. And I think that the city must do more as it relates to contributing to the educational process. I don't think the city should shy away from taking complete ownership of the school system. That doesn't allow the state off the hook from a fiduciary responsibility. But I think it does put us, particularly the mayor, the administration, and the council at the forefront of taking ownership and claim to our young folks. When we talk about schooling, what are the issues? When we talk about the trauma in our communities, right, and the breakdown and the lack of ratio associated with social workers, psychiatrists, and counselors for our young folks who literally, if you have a class of 30 kids, there's 30 different issues that you have to deal with every single morning. For something that happened in their neighborhood, something that happened in their house, something that's just going on with them, right? So we need that extra support outside of education to just support the wealth and health of our young folks to get the education. When we talk about other things, we have to go after the pipelines of dropout, right? So we know the middle school to high school pipelines are where we're having the least amount of success of young folks matriculating, graduating, and reading and writing at where they should be coming out of high school. So why not go after them? Why not put intensive resources in those pipelines? When we talk about providing young folks opportunity, why not develop ways of identifying characteristics that they will be successful in non-traditional tracks or careers and expose those tracks and careers to them sooner rather than later? And I say sooner rather than later, we're talking about middle school. Lastly, why don't we look at the jobs of tomorrow? You know, what are the jobs going to be in 5 years, 10 years, 15 years? Where are folks going to hire? And ensure that we're putting young folks in that pipeline. And again, the program that Mr. Dashiell talked about, the legislation that we proposed on Monday, is a step in that right direction. The Dante Barksdale Educational Fund will put money directly into the CTE programs of Baltimore City Public Schools to help identify what those careers of tomorrow track the kids through that program and provide them real opportunities while they're going through that program. So I think that those are the things that we could do without Kerwin, without the need of the state, but those are the things that we could and must do to provide our children with the best possible outcomes. The last thing I'll say, and this is a more controversial point and kind of a tricky point, but as it relates to the development of our children, we all have a stake at this, right? And understanding and knowing how important education is, we need everybody at the table to help solve this problem. And when I say that, I'm including our parents, I'm including our households, right? So I think that this is a huge fight. It's a critical fight, but it's a fight that's going to take everybody involved, including the parents and guardians of our children.
And Charles, if I could, let me add something to that. Everything, I agree with everything that Nick has said, and I had some experience in education. I was on the board of education in the county in the mid to early 90s, and I saw the evolution of education, public education there, and watched it evolve in the city. Number one, you can't have a system that people have confidence in to educate their children where D is a passing grade, period. I don't care what you do. D, you can't. D is not passing, okay? We need to raise the bar. Right now, the system is more concerned. I'm talking about the city now, and it's true elsewhere as well. But we're focusing on Baltimore City. The system is so concerned about accountability for what it does that it's lost sight of its real mission. It's gotten very good at filing reports and somehow reporting on the financial condition, but it's lost sight of its ultimate mission. Its mission is to educate the kids. And you've got to send a message to parents. This is a place where if you send your kids here, excellence is going to be demanded. We've got too many parents who've decided that the only opportunity to educate their kids in Baltimore City is to take them out of the public school system.
Mr. Dashiell,
rather than to make the public school system what it ought to be to educate their kids.
We have the president for another 2 minutes. Mr.
On the mayor's cabinet. No, the superintendent sits on the mayor. So the city does have the opportunity to have tremendous impact on what the school system does. They sit in the same cabinet meetings. Okay? I'm done.
Mr. President, if you became mayor today, what would be the very first thing you would do?
That's a tough question, Donnie. I would need some time to think about that. I'm really just focused on being the best city council president the city has ever seen. I think we've seen that in 90 days of the restructuring and some of the changes that we've already made. I think that you should be excited about some of the legislation, the long form legislation that we're going to come out with. Again, I think it's our role, our responsibility to develop the prescriptions to go after the systemic ills that have plagued our communities for far too long. It was this very body that was the first in the country to develop some of the most oppressive, some of the most bigoted based housing legislation. And it literally has created the segregated city and the loss of assessment values for Black and brown communities that we see today. And I think it is this body, through my leadership, that is responsible for identifying policies to kind of reverse what has been done for far too long. So that's all I'm focused on. I'm very supportive of our mayor. I look at him as a partner in progress. I think that the city needs to see African-American men working together to uplift it and move it forward. And that's what I'm committed to do.
Good deal.
Well, we want to thank you, President Mosby. I'm going to ask one little thing of you, and that is that you find a young person, a young Black male in this city, and let him walk with you one day, at least a week or maybe a month, to let them understand this ain't rocket science. It's being about people.
And if
Thank
you
you,
should
President.
Well, Charles, I appreciate that. I will tell you, I hate to keep putting my track record out there, but for the past 10 years, I've always hired a young African-American male from West Baltimore. One was a young guy I used to mentor. He was 7 years old. I was in my 20s. He went on, graduated from Emerson. He's from he was actually in Freddie Gray's class from Sandtown. He worked with me first, Shalik Fulton. The next was Carde Cornish, who also lived in the Sandtown community, a photographer. The next was Trayvon, who lived right across in Murder Mall from my house. He worked with me in Annapolis, and right now I have Xavier Platter. I met him a student at Douglas. So on my
Well, let's
staff,
continue
not
that.
just
Let's
as a
continue that.
mentee, I always have a young African American male from West Baltimore who is always with me and consistently with me.
Well, Mr. President, I want to offer that if you should ever go over or decide to visit Baltimore City Jail, particularly where the young people are, I would love to go and restart a ministry we started years ago.
Well, Donnie, you know, I used to have that mentorship program of the young folks in Baltimore City Detention Center that was awaiting trial as adults. So I used to go and mentor them once a month. It was stopped under the Hogan administration. But, you know, as a city council member, I used to do that on a monthly basis.
Well, I'd love to be a part of that. Thank you for taking time out of your schedule. Special thank you to Yvonne Wenger for coordinating this, and however we can be of service, let us know.
No, thanks a million.
Thank you.
See you, Nick.
We've been joined by the one and only, the Bishop, Doug Miles. Good morning, sir. He froze up on me.
Good morning. I'm sorry I'm having technical difficulty. I didn't know I needed to be plugged into the internet, so I'm on Wi-Fi, so I'm on my phone to get the best reception.
What's the word? You heard the interview with the president. Any thoughts?
Yeah, I think Baltimore is at a serious crossroads. And I think the primary thing driving that crossroad is that the city does not have a vision that everybody is buying into. I've been making that statement for the past 10 years, that after the vision that centered around the Inner Harbor, Baltimore has been like a ship without a rudder, and it's just been drifting from one program to another, but no strategic plan to move Baltimore into the 21st century. As much as we criticize the Inner Harbor plan, at least that was a plan that initially all of Baltimore was behind, and it came to fruition. But right now, there is no clear vision for this city.
Bishop Miles, this is Charles Robinson. A number of clergy across this city have had issues, as you've already indicated, with more focus on the downtown, not within the communities. Talk about this idea, if you will, that it's not just downtown and the Inner Harbor, but it's communities across the city.
You know, that's a misnomer that the faith community was against Inner Harbor development. When Inner Harbor development was first introduced, and people need to understand, Inner Harbor development was not Schaefer's idea. It began under McKeldin 20 years before Schaefer. He became, and the vision outlived every mayor that participated in that vision. The faith community was never against Inner Harbor development. What the faith community has consistently said is it cannot be only Inner Harbor development. The original plan was that they would develop the Inner Harbor, that it would be ringed by healthy neighborhoods, and then the healthy neighborhoods would be ringed by the Beltway. Well, with all the focus on downtown, the healthy neighborhoods disintegrated because there was no effort made to keep communities stable. There was no effort made to keep the school system stable. Some on here, like my brother Dashiell and you, can remember when Baltimore City schools were the envy of the state, and people outside of Baltimore would lie to get their children into Baltimore City schools. What happened? Under Schaefer, there was disinvestment in education in this city. Mid-year in the 1980s, Schaefer came in and did a mid-year reduction of staff that devastated the school system, and the school system has never recovered from that. He divested in terms of limiting the amount of city funds that went into the city schools. And so, of course, better qualified teachers went to other districts. So it's never been just the faith community against the Inner Harbor. What we have said is it's the Inner Harbor plus.
Arias, I want to give you an opportunity to ask a question of Bishop Miles. Go ahead.
Good morning, Bishop. You've always quoted that the city needs time. You've always quoted that the city needs time to build and not look up to any type of politicians at all. Who do they need to look to and turn to?
The driving force in any city, not the political establishment. The driving force is the corporate community. Politicians do what the corporate community says that they ought to do, because the corporate community invests in campaigns, funds campaigns, and if you check the record of when people run for office, the major corporations, the major corporate leaders in the city contribute to everybody's campaign, because no matter who gets elected, they want a seat at the table with that elected official. So the vision that has to be created for Baltimore has to include the corporate community, the political community, the philanthropic community, and of course, residents of this city must be at the table as equal partners, not as an addendum to a strategy developed by others.
Robert, go ahead.
First of all, I Doug, how you doing? I haven't seen you in years, and you haven't aged a bit. It doesn't look like to me. But we got to.
Thanks for lying to
me. We got to define what. Look, we got to define what it means, what business really means, and what economic development means. I'm convinced of the following, having watched and developed this for 45 years. I'm convinced that the value of business in the community is the opportunity that it presents to the people that work for it to earn a living adequate and sufficient to support their families, period. The purpose of the value of business is not to make the owners rich. It's not to increase the membership in the President's Round Table or the Center Club. It's if it doesn't provide the kind of employment opportunities, it's going to provide wages and compensation and benefits sufficient to allow the employees to support their families, then it's of absolutely no value as to the public. It's of no value. It means nothing. And the problem in Baltimore City, as the bishop indicates, is not just lack of vision about economic development or education. We don't have vision in it. Nobody takes a canvas that's empty and paints a picture that says, this is what the world looks like if it gets fixed the way I think it ought to be fixed. What does the end look like? What will it look like when minority business has achieved its rightful place? What does that mean? What does it mean to be in the 21st century? What does that mean? Only the purpose of government is to protect the poor from the rich. Rich folk don't need government. They can buy what they want, right? The purpose of government is not to be efficient. The purpose of government is to make sure that those that are in the majority, financial and otherwise, don't take undue advantage of those who are not in power. That's the only purpose of government, to keep the playing field level among the people that it governs. That's its function. It doesn't have to be efficient. It can't be. It's not a business. You don't run government like a business, because the real capital in government is the human resources, is the people. That's the purpose. So we need to think, if we don't rethink this whole paradigm, over 500,000 people would have died for nothing during this so-called pandemic. No, we don't want to go back to what it was, because what it was had too many Black people running up the down staircase, chasing after an illusory thing called opportunity that was never going to be there in the first place. We don't want to go back to that, but we do have to define what it is we want to get to. And I submit to the bishop and everybody else the question that I always say: there's only one issue in the universe, and that is who decides who decides.
Bishop, I wanted to take you back to your days when you built Baltimoreans United in Leadership Development put some 350, forgive me for not knowing the number, but new homes here in Sandtown. We have not seen anything of that magnitude since. Can we see that again?
Well, in fact, it's actually happening on the east side. Bill is rebuilding the Oliver community. We've built over 700 new homes over in the Oliver community for middle income and low income people. There's rental property and there's home ownership. What I would say, Bob, is that I think you've got it inverted. You've got the world as it should be rather than the world as it is. The purpose of government is not in the world as it is not to protect the poor from the rich, is to protect the rich from the poor. Government operates as a buffer between the have-nots and the haves. Please note that whenever there's civil disobedience, when the politician shows up, the first thing he or she says is, "Let me handle it. Be calm. Let me handle it." Because the role of government in this society now is to protect those with wealth. It should be the other way around, but that's not how it operates.
Well, that's because we keep
in regards
people.
to.
Go ahead. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
No, I would argue that that it's not just the elected people; it's the system itself. Because again, the system itself is driven by money, and money drives politicians. And politicians respond to those who have the bucks. And again, business has to have a calm climate in which to function. That's why business gets so upset when there are riots or there are protests, because business can't survive in an atmosphere of upheaval. So that's the strength that ordinary people have. It's just the threat of disrupting. But that threat has to be organized. That's one of the things that fails with movements, because they have no organizational base. They spring up and they die. They have no longevity. One of the reasons the Build organization has had some success is that it's institutionally based in the church. The church is going to be around. I don't care how strong or how weak, it's going to be around. And again, if you look at what's happening in Baltimore, where things are moving forward, it's organized people and organized money. Again, in Oliver, we're rebuilding the Oliver community where the Dawson family was firebombed. We've created a program called Turnaround Tuesday that has put to work over 800 returning citizens, and not just in living wage jobs, but in jobs that have career paths in medical institutions primarily. But that can only be done when you have organized people who can stay together over an extended period of time, because if nothing else, government and business can outweigh protests.
Bishop Miles,
with the Black Lives
Matter.
Matter.
Hold on for a minute, Bob.
Right.
Bishop Miles, I need to drill down on probably the most pertinent issue in the African American community, and that is COVID-19. It has killed an inordinate number of people in our communities. There is, not necessarily universal, but there is some resistance to this idea of getting vaccinated. I know, and Donnie Glover will back me up on this when he comes back on, they have kind of began to look at how do we get these vaccines into communities. And there has been talk about using the religious communities, specifically Black churches like the Build Group, in order to get in. I've made this simple argument. This is a humanitarian issue. In other words, the idea being that if we don't get this vaccine, we will be the biggest losers. I think you would agree with that concept. And are the members of Build willing and able to reach out to health departments across the city and say, we need to, first of all, vaccinate our seniors and vaccinate our most vulnerable populations?
I agree wholeheartedly. And one of the things that distresses me in this town is that organizations like Build do not get adequate coverage from the media. We're doing exactly what you said. One of our churches, Sacred Heart of Jesus Church in Highlandtown, is a focal point for vaccination for those in the Hispanic community. Our church has applied for, and soon hopefully will be online as one of the institutions in Northeast Baltimore that will primarily look to get vaccinated African Americans and people of Caribbean descent. There are a number of churches that are ready, willing, and able to do that. The problem is when you have public officials like the governor who choose to use other means first rather than turning to the institution that is the heart and the soul of the Black community. Still to this day, it's not what it used to be, but it's still the heart and the soul of the Black community, the faith community. We can reach people that others cannot reach, and we ought to be. Our folk are dying, as you said, and they're dying primarily out of ignorance and fear. I saw posted on Facebook, and I think this is pertinent, that people have been eating hot dogs and sausages for years and they don't know what's in it. But now all of a sudden they won't take a vaccine because they can't define everything that's in the vaccine. Well, no one in the African American community primarily could define what's in the measles vaccine or the flu vaccine, but we take it. We've got to overcome the distrust, and that can only be overcome by people who are in relationship with the community that we seek to serve.
Bishop, I think the issue of ignorance and fear has been entirely overplayed. I think that's being used as an excuse for the underutilization of the vaccine in our communities. The fact of the matter is, what is going on now in your church, at New Psalmist, at Union Baptist, and at other churches could have been going on all along. All you had to do is what you've already done: go to Hopkins, go to Maryland, and say, give me some shots so that I can deliver them to my people. That's all you had to do. I mean, I think they hit on. Frankly, I'm not a big time Hogan supporter, but frankly, the challenge to the governor, I think, was misplaced. He didn't stop you from doing everything that you're doing right now. It could have been done, and the things that you've been doing all along, you're right. Nobody knows about it, and that's a problem. That's why having this show like with Donnie and Charles is so great, because at least it provides some opportunity for people to find out what the heck is going on. But Hogan didn't stop the vaccination from being distributed within the inner community. All we had to do was go to Hopkins and go to the University of Maryland and say, give me some doses so that we can spread them out to the churches. You send your people in to administer the vaccine and we can have it work. It's being done right now. And the fact that it's been happening now is proof to me that it could have happened 2 months ago or 3 months ago. But nobody bothered to ask. Nobody bothered to do it until you guys started doing it.
But if you look back, even with testing, we had to fight to get testing sites in Black communities.
Yes, that's right.
To fight to get that, to make that happen. And this isn't happening by happenstance. Again, the majority of the doses that came into Baltimore went to Hopkins and to the University of Maryland. They did not go to Black institutions, and that was not by accident. And I'm not criticizing University of Maryland nor Hopkins. I would take the vaccine too if it was offered to me, but because there is not a real coming together, even in the Black faith community, we neuter ourselves and we neuter our power to bring to the community that which needs to be done. And again, when groups like the Build organization do things, the media doesn't cover it.
Yeah. Well, let me say first, the Pfizer vaccine could only go to Maryland and Hopkins because they're the only two that had the facility to store it. It had to be stored at 92 degrees below zero. And nobody, that's a little colder than what most people have in their refrigerators. So Pfizer was specifically in reality designed for healthcare institutions or places that could properly store it and transport it. And as I said before, the Hopkins never refused the request to. I've spoken with the president of the Maryland Hospital Association. We talked about designing a program just like what Build is doing. Months ago, we talked about having that thing, and they were always willing to do it. And so I just think we have it now. I think that when I visited several sites at Union Memorial and other places that I have friends that go, I don't see a lot of Black folks there, and they're sitting right in the middle of the Black community. So I asked, why aren't Black folks in here? And I find out that the Black folk in the community didn't know the site existed, even though they live right around the corner from it.
Correct.
It wasn't being marketed to the Black community, and the excuse was, well, they're too fearful of taking it. Well, that's bull. we know it's bull. And so anyway, I applaud you, Bishop, and the other members of the clergy community that are doing the things you do. And for first of all, explaining to folks that the faith community isn't confined to the walls of the church. The faith community includes everybody who believes and has faith, period. But go ahead.
If nothing else, the pandemic has proven is that the faith community cannot exist just behind the walls.
That's exactly right.
With all the institutions closed down, the faith community has still stayed intact. But again, we and I'm not excluding us. We still must do more, and there's more that we can do. But when we do, it's often ignored by the press.
Yeah.
I doubt if there are a whole lot of people in Baltimore who know about the Turnaround Tuesday program, and it's open to any ex-offender, and they're walked with for not just for a 30-day training period. They're walked with till they get a job, and they receive wraparound services until they have shown that they can stand on their own. Many who have gone through the program are now homeowners. They've gone back to college. They've got careers in the medical institutions. But how many in Baltimore really know what's happening with Turnaround Tuesday? And before the pandemic, it was meeting every Tuesday at Zion Baptist Church.
Bishop, who do you see coming up that we should be keeping our eye on in the faith community?
In terms of younger pastors?
Who's the next Bishop Doug Miles?
Well, I hope I've groomed him. Reverend Dante Miles, who's now my pastor. Since we've reversed roles, he's now the senior pastor of the Cornelia Church, and I'm now the pastor. So it's my hope that I've groomed. But you have George Hopkins down in Southwest Baltimore. You have I think that one of the things that the pandemic will force the Black church to do is to re-examine how it has related to the Black community over the past 15 years. Over the past 15, 20 years, the Black church got lost in worship, in praise and worship, and lost connection with the community. And now with this pandemic, it's forced us to really examine even how we worship. A whole lot of the theatrics that traditionally go on in the Black church have been exposed to be just that. And you can't get away with it on Facebook and internet and other means of social media. You've got to have some substance when you preach. You just can't. Additionally, I think the pandemic will bring people, as I think we've misplaced what's going to happen with the pandemic. I think the pandemic, when it's over, is going to bring people back to the institution because people miss being in social settings. And the church must be prepared to receive people in a different way. Over the past 20 years, the Black church in large measure has ministered to the Black community the way white churches ministered to the Black community when our community started integrating. The provision of service, but you can't be a part of us. You know, don't you dare come in here with those nasty clothes on. Don't you dare come in here with your poor self. So the Black community has evolved into a middle-class institution that no longer, and basically commuter, that's no longer in touch with the communities where the church is located. The pandemic is going to force us out beyond the walls to reconnect with those surrounding the churches if we're going to survive. Because
Bishop, I just want to jump in.
Virtual.
We have a young man here, Darius. And Darius, I want you to know you have three of the most intelligent Black men you will ever find in this world. One's a lawyer, one's a journalist, one is a faith leader. Any questions?
Yes, sir. Question for the bishop. Now, within the Black community, which you lead your followers, even when you do get the vaccine, we go there with the trucks, we go pick them up, we bring them to the church to distribute. Do you believe it's a lot of us that believe that the vaccine is not even safe? Do you believe you can get those people to actually take the vaccine with your influence?
I definitely believe that we can get people to take the vaccine. There will always be some who are reluctant because of past experiences that the Black community has had with medical institutions. But I think that we're at a point where people are craving getting back together in social setting. And the quickest way to that is through vaccination. And, if it's made available, I think people will come to get vaccinated if they know that it's available.
I just want to say, Bishop, the medical community has very little credibility in terms of credit rating. They have a -1 million credit score in the Black community when you think of Henrietta Lacks, North Carolina sterilizations, the Tuskegee experiment, even Fort Detrick and HIV/AIDS. We don't trust the medical community in America. They have a history of hurting us.
Donnie, 9 out of 10 Black people have, if you said that on the street corner, 9 out of 10 wouldn't have the foggiest idea what you were talking about. I'm telling you, they're promoting that. Those who don't want us to have the vaccine are using that as a reason for not making it available. That's what I'm telling you. That's a lie. And we need to stop repeating it, because that's not the reason why Black folk are not taking the vaccine.
Okay, they were giving out the vaccine out of Liberty Resource Center. I understand that the crowd getting the shot was majority white.
And you think that means that Black folk didn't want it, or that Black folk didn't know they were there giving it out?
I would go with the latter.
That's correct.
But how could that be in Randallstown?
I would say this
of Julian Jones.
I would say this: if the vaccine didn't work, then the larger community would not be standing in line to get it. That people like DeSantis wouldn't be trying to get it to rich white communities. So I think that ought to be a part of the discussion for any African American who's reluctant to take it. But I agree with Bob that if it's made available, if it's publicized, people will come and get vaccinated.
Yeah,
I haven't run into a whole lot of people who said that they will not.
Bishop, this was a
people had some question about it because of the speed in which it was done, but when they've seen so many of our communities overlooked, now Black folk are saying there's something going on, and we need to get in line.
Yeah.
Mr. Robinson, any final questions?
No, Bishop. Thank you very much for joining us.
But Bishop, there's something I wanted to ask you.
Thank you for inviting me.
Bishop, would you have prayer for us, our show, our city, our young people, our seniors, before we end this program?
Be more than happy to. Let us pray. Gracious God, we thank you that you've placed us on the stage of history at this time, because it reminds us that our mission is not over until you call us home. I pray that you will revive within each of us a spirit of determination to want to see the positive happen in our communities. I pray for this broadcast that it will be beneficial for those who seek knowledge, who seek to understand better how they can live and how they can share in the work that needs to be done. I pray for the elected officials of this city, Lord, and I pray that you will give them clear vision and a strong determination to stand for that which is right. I pray for our neighborhoods and for peace within it. I pray that somehow, Lord, you will use us to quell the violence and remind us anew that you will never do for us that which you've empowered us to do for ourselves. I pray for every family that's lost loved ones, for every community that's going through the valley of despair and grief. And I ask, oh God, that you give us renewed hope, reminding us that yes, weeping may endure and does endure sometimes, not just for a day, but for a month, for a year, but that you're able to bring joy in the morning. Bless us now as we go forth from this place to be your servants in this generation, and keep us mindful always of the need to share the legacy so that the story of how you brought us over will never grow stale. For this we pray in Christ Jesus' name. Amen.
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 Thank you all.
Thank you
Bless
very
you, my
much.
brothers.
I want to thank all
Call
of
me
you.
if I can help you. I certainly
Have a
will.
good rest of the day.
Bye-bye.
Yes.
I want to thank everybody for joining
All
us
right.
on this conversation. And I want to specifically thank Donnie Glover, who can catch me every once in a while. And on this one, it was a great conversation. To everybody else on the call, and Bishop Miles, continue to do what you're doing. Donnie, keep Black business in the forefront. Donnie and I are going to be doing a trip this summer to the home of the Black Wall Street. We're going to go to Oklahoma. We're going to go to Tulsa. So look forward to that. Yeah, and you know, I promised that to him, and we're going to have a wonderful time there. I know that.
Bishop, we love you. We thank you for your leadership. Thank you for taking time, for blessing Darius. You too, Mr. Robinson. Darius, Mr. Robinson is our senior journalist. Now you've met him.
Good morning.
Thank you,
Just glad
everyone,
to
for
be in the
joining us
mix
today. Down tomorrow. Do your day and everything will follow. Nothing to it but to do it. I got to do it, regardless of how I feel. I am somebody.
Somebody.
I am my brother and sister's keeper. Good morning, BlackUSA.News.